I am going to pretty much jump off where we left off in the last session. I did do a couple of things behind the scenes, so I'm just going to round up or sort of catch you up on the just a couple of very small things that I did behind the scenes. So the smallest thing that I did is I went ahead and I made this lamp and the table flush with the floor. You may remember last time they looked like they were kind of floating, and the reason is because they were floating. So I got them together. And actually, you know, that's pretty much it. I cleaned up some build curves and put them in the build curves layer. So at this point, what we want to talk about, the game is going to change a little bit. We're going to spend maybe 10 or 15 more minutes talking about lighting and trying some other things with lighting. And then we're going to spend some time thinking about material. So, and then in our last video, which is coming, this is our last video. I might make a mini video. We'll have to see about that. I might make a mini video or a bonus video, but we will definitely get to all of the things. So worry not. All right, well, thinking about more lighting. Well, so there's a couple of things that we can do. Right now we're kind of using this rendered viewport to sort of preview our lighting. And that's a reasonable thing to do. We can control click and we can go to that rendered viewport. When I say rendering, I'm really talking about sort of like a final version that's fully rendered. And I'm going to make one overnight tonight and stick it in this video when we get finished with all of our materials and everything, because it does take a little while to do that. There are two renderers in Rhino, and I'm going to try to make a sample with both renderers. One I think is a lot faster, but probably not nearly as nice. The other is really, really good looking. It can get really great results, but it takes a long time. I mean a long time. So I'm not expecting you to use the time-consuming one for your assignment. This sort of so-called legacy renderer is fine. But we're going to kind of just play around with that today. And we'll kind of work through those different options. So getting back to sort of lighting, there's a couple of areas where I think we could certainly add some lighting. One would be this lamp. That would probably be the most obvious. So it looks like I'm also missing part of the lamp. Oh, fun. Okay, so I'm not missing part of the lamp. It's actually just it's having a verticality problem. So I should be able to just pop it up there. Yay, it's back. It also looks like at some point when I made this into a group, I might have forgotten this little surface here. So let's go ahead and add that back in. We'll have to recreate that. So I'm going to go ahead and just go to edge curves, and then I can select the surfaces from there. So I'm going to use the edge curves method and just real quickly kind of hello. Maybe I can see it better. Nope. Sometimes in Rhino, the challenge is actually getting to see, being able to see stuff. And so here I can get to it from over here. Okay, and then there I go with that. So now I can select the surface, and I should be able to add it to the group. And I need to select the group, and so now it's all perfect. Okay, so like I said, we went ahead and we put a tube in the light. Rhino is not one of those Rhino is not one of those renderers that will allow you to, sorry, so you can see now I'm having some performance issues with my rendered view, which are causing me like a little bit of trouble navigating because it's not sort of like syncing up with what I tell it to do. It's kind of annoying. So a good way to kind of like get around that would be to highlight the object that you want to work on and click this button with it's called Zoom Selected. And then if you click on this and then Zoom Selected, it will click on this object for you. Now, for some reason, at some point along the way, I think it's possible we might have deleted a light. So I'm going to go ahead and in the perspective view, I'm going to take it into wireframe mode just temporarily. And I'm just going to try to kind of like figure out what is going on real quickly. And then we'll come back to lighting the lamp. No, that spotlight is still there. Very interesting. It's still turned on. So let me check this one more time. It could just be Rhino like having issues. Sometimes also with the render. Oh yeah, it's fine. Because we have like a really kind of, at this point, a pretty complex lighting setup with all these holes and stuff, that's giving Rhino a lot to do computationally. So if you're actually just kind of modeling and just navigating through the file and setting things up, you may want to actually default to sort of like a less capable rendering preview, like Ghosted maybe, or something like that, and that will just kind of get you in and get you into the file and able to do things. And then when you're done doing things, you can kind of come out and then you can kind of compose your lighting and, you know, do your rendering and everything like that. The rendered view is not meant to be like a working view. It's meant to be a finishing view. So let's see, we've got a tube in here. We're not going to use the tube for lighting because Rhino doesn't allow us to just convert objects into lights like some other 3D modelers do. Okay, so let's get that linear light. And I'm going to try to create it just at the bottom of this sort of tube shape. And you can see it's definitely putting some light out. So what we could do, it's kind of not a terrible idea to be able to turn the lights off and on. So one thing that I do with lights in particular is I make a sublayer on regular layers. And so I can call this one desk lamp. Okie dokie. And now we can kind of, well, first of all, we need to get it on there. And now we can kind of see the effect that it's having. Yikes. A lot. So let's go ahead and bring it back. Another thing that can be a really useful way of telling, you know, kind of where lights are or what lights are doing what, is by giving them a color. You can give them like an outrageous color if you want to, you know, sort of like really be sure, or you can just kind of, you know, give them a more sort of like, you know, artful tone. I have some sample colors here that I use really frequently, which is just cyan, yellow, and magenta. There's a reason I use those three colors. They're the sort of colors, constituent colors of light. Rhino will do what's called additive mixing. So if you mix all of those colors together, it'll give you white. Yeah, this seems fine as far as the color goes. I'm going to go ahead and knock down the intensity a little bit. I think there, in a perfect world, honestly, there are other things that I could do with the lamp, but it's going to just have to stay where it is right for now. And I guess also the biggest thing, I'm just noticing that this point is not really set under the lamp. So that would be a huge problem. I'm going to go ahead and fix that for sure. Nope, it is over here. Sorry. I'm losing my brain here today. Losing my mind. Hello, Snap. Okay. That looks fine. So I think this is pretty much donezo. Now, we want to kind of like talk about lighting, but I feel like we've already kind of done a lot with lighting, so I want to make sure that I give enough time for materials. There are a couple types of lighting that we didn't talk about. The rectangular light is great for like it's very soft. It's going to throw out like a lot of soft light, so you could think of it as like a fluorescent light fixture in a ceiling or something like that. The spotlight obviously is the most sort of dramatic. The point light is really useful because it can come from just about anywhere. So right now we've got 3 point lights in here. And we can also experiment with color. We may do that later on. Now, let's go ahead just a little bit further, and we're going to start thinking about textures. And so I think that the first thing that we should think about texture for is the floor. So we're going to kind of transform the floor. And right now, I think the room is locked, so I'm going to unlock it. So let me go ahead and select that floor. And then over here in the Properties Objects palette, sort of palette thing, you're going to find a way to work with the materials. So in order to use an image texture in Rhino, we have to create or use what's called a material. So there are default materials that we can look at, and then there are custom materials that have some of them. There's a list of presets. So let's go ahead and make a custom material. And we're going to go ahead and we're just going to give a simple color texture too. So if I click here, it'll open up a window for me, and I just so happen to have some wood textures hiding in my hard drive next to all of my administrative paperwork, of course. And so now you can see that I've chosen that image and I have now applied that texture. I may have actually gotten a little bit ahead of myself. I may have already applied a texture to the table. Sorry. But let's go ahead and let's do a couple other types of textures. And then I'm going to kind of swing back around and we're going to edit the wood floor, because I know how thick standard wood floor slats are supposed to be. And these are a little too thick. So I'm going to show you how to scale the texture relative to the object, which is pretty important. So the table is pretty obviously wood. This thing, I feel like we had talked about it maybe being paper or something like that. So we could certainly look and see if they have a material like that. I kind of doubt that they do. But we can also just go to the custom list. Well, we're going to add, this is so clunky. You have to fill out add this little plus sign, and then every time you do that, it'll add a new material. So here, it doesn't look like they have any paper presets, but these are all the presets that they have. So I'm going to start with maybe like smoky glass. That would be really cool. So let's try that. In general, the more reflective and the more transparent your material, the longer it will take to render it successfully. So working with that kind of material can be kind of tricky. I'm going to give it just kind of like a 50% gray or something. Okay. So right now the clarity is set at 100%, which means that it's completely see-through. That's definitely not what we want. And then there's also the incidence of refraction. You can see that right now it's sort of like, looks like it's still pretty much mostly see-through. That's probably because the render preview can't handle it. So you can't always kind of believe what you see. I'm actually going to try a different preset, which is called the gemstone preset, which is sort of built to be not transparent. So this, gemstone thing is super fun. Let's see, types, diamond. Let's go for amethyst. You know, it doesn't seem like it's doing a really great job on this form. It kind of makes me wonder if maybe there's some issue with it and its geometry. So I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and do the other things. Oh no, yeah, it's there. It's just not being very... It's not being very significant. You know, it's not holding like a lot. And you know, I think the reason why it's not holding a lot of color from these gems is that we made it a 1/4 inch thick. So that's probably a problem. So that makes actually a lot of sense that, you know, it's not going to hold like some translucent color because it's super thin. Let's go ahead and maybe think about using one of the metal presets or something like that. It's a good way to shop through the presets, I guess I'll say that. So yes, metal, so fun. So you basically have your options of colors and polishes, and so I think I'm still going to go for this sort of steel gray. Oh, excuse me. These Butterfingers over here. And then you can also, you know, there are some prefab textures, bump textures, which are kind of fun. Not really necessary at all, but you know, you can do it. Okay, so I'm gonna leave that that alone for a minute. It's not kind of picking up right now a lot of light, partially because it's in the sort of preview environment, but also because it's you know, being lit from inside. So once again, we need to group this lamp in order to kind of give it a material. And we can sort of accidentally, you know, well, let's get rid of the light for just a second. We'll get rid of the table. And, man, get rid of the room. And I am going to just group that real quickly. And bring back the room, bring back the table. Okay, so now we can give this a material, and that's probably, I was thinking definitely a metal for this. So I can actually reuse this metal texture, or I can create a new one if I want it to have different parameters. So I kind of want this to be brass, I think. So for something like brass, I would certainly want like only yellower. And I'm just going to kind of knock it down a little bit so it's not quite so saturated. And for polish level, I think I'm going to turn this one up to like 11 or maybe 100%. And here I think I also do want a kind of like a hatch texture would be fun. So it looks brushed. And then for the last, not the last object, you may think it's the last object, but it's not. We have to get through this beach ballin'. Okay, we're done beach ballin'. This object right here, I think I will maybe make another material. And I think this one I'm also going to use that gemstone preset, and I think it's going to look a little bit different because, you know, it has more sort of thickness to it. So let me just see what happened there. Yeah, so you can see it's like kind of barely there. Yeah. All right, so we could be done with our textures, but we're not. There's one last texture to sort of think about, and that is the idea of the walls. So the walls are indeed right now just sort of some generic super smooth surface. So I'm going to select them both, and we're going to look at some paint textures. So I'm fine with white as the sort of like color, but we've for the walls, although you can try any color you like, including gray or black can do some really amazing things with your lighting. But for now, we're just going to keep this the way it is. We're kind of pressed for time. So I think here we're going to make another custom material. We're going to go for the paint. Do, 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 do. Do, do, do. Hello. All right, and right now the glossiness is set to 100%. That's crazy. We wanted it like maybe like 10 or 15%. So from here, it looks like certain things are kind of, you know, going on. But now that we have the sort of materials set up, some of what's going on in the preview is that Rhino's just not really able to kind of offer a full preview of what is going on, because we've got lots of light bouncing everywhere. We've got objects that are reflective, you know, and a lot of stuff like that. So I think, for example, you know, when we go ahead and render this, you should be able to see some reflections in some of these objects. And so that's kind of super fun. But that's something that you can only really play with when you do the actual rendering. So I'm going to sort of, you know, make a snapshot of this. And by snapshot, I mean literally like, to just say, hey, y'all, remember this, because in a few minutes for you, overnight for me, I'm going to go ahead and make a rendering, a full quality rendering of this. So I'm going to show you what my render settings are, and then when we come back, we're going to sort of look at the full-on render. And then I probably will go ahead and make a rendering for the pod, in case you have not forgotten about the pod. But the pod is still here, and the pod is still doing all of its pod-like things. So we could certainly make a rendering for the pod as well. So if I have time, I will assign some materials in here and go ahead and render the pod as well. I think we should, because it deserves equal treatment. Okay, so let me go ahead and resituate the camera for the room. And I actually want to kind of come in a little bit. I don't want it to be quite such a wide shot. So this should be, it also looks a little bit like unbalanced. So this should be good for a good place to start for making a rendering. So you can see I have it kind of arranged in my perspective view, how I want it. I'm using the rendering preview to kind of compose it, right, in the boundaries. And I can go up here to render, the render menu and render properties. I'm going to go over a lot of specific things, so watch out. Okay, so we are in the Rhino render. We can also use the legacy Rhino render. So if you're looking for something to finish quickly, you can go ahead and use the legacy Rhino render. I'm going to show you an example with that, and then I'm going to show you the other example, which will be the kind of leaving it overnight type example of the the new Rhino render that came out in version 7. And we can kind of put them side by side and say, wow, that took an extra 12 hours. Was it worth it? I'm guessing probably not, but you know, we could be convinced. I don't do a lot of rendering in my own work. I only do rendering when I need to get a job to make money, and like similarly to an architect. So when I have to sell something basically that isn't done yet, I'll make a rendering. But you know, like for the most part, I'm actually using Rhino to make things. So I stop at the sort of drawing level. But rendering is super fun. I mean, you know, you can make things look like anything you want, like absolutely wacky fantasy worlds. Okay, so we're going to start by selecting the size. So I would recommend that you make a rendering that is at least 1920 by 1080. Okay? So you should select that option. DPI, we can actually set that all the way down to 72. Quality. I'm going to go with final quality. I would suggest that you go with at least good quality. Do not select draft or low quality. The only thing that I use draft quality for is when you want to know, like, is that light on or off? The quality is really low. So, okay. Then background, if you have the background visible, then this may be of interest to you. The 360 environment is kind of neat. We're not going to get into it, but if you want to read the guidelines, you can do some amazing things with actually having images that are sort of become your lighting studio. So it's pretty complicated. Okay. Other important stuff. Dun, 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 dun. Use custom environment for reflections. You can uncheck that. Transparent background. Uncheck that. Unless you really want a transparent background. Someone may ask me, hey Meg, why would I want a transparent background in my Rhino rendering? And I would say, well, person who's not me, if you want to use your Rhino rendering in this thing called Photoshop, then having a transparent background might be useful. Photoshop is also a great way to do what's called in the industry, post-processing. In other words, if there's some kind of weird lighting effect that you can't do in Rhino, you can definitely do it in Photoshop. And people do that a lot. Okay, so moving down to the next category, lighting. I would have this all unchecked, particularly if you are using your own lights, which you should be doing because it's kind of part of the assignment. So use lights on layers that are off can be good or bad. It depends on kind of what you want to do. Also, if you're using your own lighting, I would suggest putting the ambient light at black, which basically means there's no extra lighting that you don't set. If you set the ambient lighting to like lime green, literally everyone will have a lime green like kind of cast. So it can be weird, and I almost never use ambient light because I just set up my own lighting. It's not that hard. So other stuff, we're getting down to the bottom here. The wireframe, you should certainly probably not have any of this stuff checked, but it can be interesting. If you want to use any of these options to like render curves or stuff like that, you can kind of get a cartoony effect or almost like a more draftsman-like effect. And so I guess that's okay, but we don't really, not necessary. All right, so then you close it when you're done. Dun-dun. And you hit this button or you select render from the render menu. Okay, my computer's gonna kind of have convulsions for just a minute, and I will be back. Hi, so we're here in the Rhino render, and and this is pretty much what it looks like when you're right in the middle of a render. So we get this sort of sneak peek. It's got the black bars that move around. It says I've got about 8 minutes left, and I think since I hit pause, it's been maybe 2 or 3 minutes. So this is totally I think a sufficient option for the assignment. Just once again, you have to make sure you select the Legacy Rhino render. I'll check in with you when this is done, and we can kind of have a maybe initial evaluation. And then I'm going to go ahead and do the other method. So I'll see you all, check back in a few seconds when this is done. Okay, we're done! Well, so as you can see, the render time was about 10 minutes. That's not very much at all. You can also see really clearly, wow, it's very, very different from the render preview, as I'm sure you can guess. And so I think that what this is going to, allow us to do is just, we can save a version of this. So I can just click the save button. The save button. Oh my goodness. Cat mayhem. And it, for some reason, defaults to a bitmap image, but you would certainly want to save it as a JPEG, or if you're going to take it into Photoshop, I would save it as a TIFF. But if you're done with it and you're just going to turn it in, I would save it as a JPEG. So there we go. So that's saved. So I'm going to go ahead and get out of this, and I'm going to reset the render properties briefly to use the other renderer, which is the Rhino renderer. And just want to make sure that that's specified up top, that this time we're using the Rhino render. And we're going to keep the image size exactly the same. All of the parameters are going to be exactly the same. When we get down to the settings that are specific to the Rhino render, this is what they should be. So you can maybe hit pause and take a screenshot at this point. But the Rhino render, the new Rhino render is based on the concept of ray tracing, which sort of very simply explained takes a beam of light or a photon and follows the way that it moves across the scene before it renders a pixel. So, and every pixel in this setup is getting sampled 1,000 times to see if it has light in it or not. So it's a little bit more kind of complicated than the other renderer. But for our purposes, you know, these are just kind of default settings. So I have it set on good. So let me go ahead and close this. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that that renderer is selected. It is, and then I'm going to render. Now, while this is rendering, I want to just talk to you about a couple of things in the other example. So you can see now it's running the renderer, and it's going to take a long time. I will probably wait overnight for it. Let's see. All right, so we're back and we're rendering right now. So this is the previous rendering, and I just wanted to kind of call your attention to a few things. Notice that the pixel size was about 1920 by 1080. So if we use a larger pixel size, you know, we'll get more ability to kind of zoom in on some of these details. You can see that there's a lot of details going on here that we did not see in the previous render preview. So, for example, you know, all these reflections here and here, all of this lovely shadow play here and in here. The lamp looks pretty good. It does have a texture, so that's some of what we're seeing is that texture that I applied to it. And then over here, of course, we have this sort of amethyst vase. And I think that, you know, we could certainly get the Rhino, the legacy Rhino renderer to do a better job. I would say a good way to make it do a better job would be to just give the renderer a much larger pixel size. And then you can sample down if you need to. So it's just like when you're working with digital photography, you know, you want the highest resolution render possible to get the highest quality. So I would say that this is pretty good. I do know that the ray tracing, the standard Rhino render that we're waiting for now, is going to look quite different. So I can't wait until it finishes and we can kind of put them neck and neck. So here is the Rhino render, sort of kicking along with bouncing those photons around. And you can see it's at about, 6 out of 1,000 sort of tracing samples. And yeah, it's going to take a while. So at this point, I'm going to sign off for just a second. And I'm going to wake up in the morning or maybe much later this evening and check on this thing and see if it's done. And then we'll do a side-by-side comparison. So I'll have to see you all in a couple seconds, or 8 to 10 hours. Well, here we are. It is 17 hours later. So that was no short rendering session. So you see your two choices at this point are 10 minutes or 17 hours. I'm sure that we can get the short one to be longer if we increase the pixels. We can also get this one probably to reduce the time a little bit. But you can see, oh, hello. You can see that a lot of things are different. I think the main difference is that it's really blatantly obvious that the light on this linear light is turned on, and it looks like in the Rhino render version it is off. So we're going to kind of like temporarily ignore that difference. And I'm just going to address a couple of other things. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a follow-up video, and I am going to do these renders over and try to get the light on in this version. And also, it looks like from looking at the other version that I need to kind of knock it down a little bit. It seems really bright, like stupid bright. So I will kind of take the next couple of days to kind of fiddle with that. And this is just for, you know, my own benefit. I'm not certainly not expecting for you to spend days fiddling with a rendering. I just want to kind of do a pseudoscientific experiment. So in terms of comparing these two things. So if we bring up the other rendering, we can look at some areas and you can kind of see a little bit of the difference. Let's see. Zoom out a little bit. Let me get this window in here. So you can see one of the things that seems to be a little bit different is that the way that, it's hard to explain, it's like the way that the light kind of falls through this particular object is a little bit more complex. It's kind of, it's really impossible to see with this linear light kind of blaring. So anyway, I mean, you can see now the other difference that you can see is that the Rhino render at final quality is going to look pretty smooth, like the tones are going to look nice and smooth. The ray traced version is going to have a slight texture depending on how many samples you do. They say that a final rendering would have 1,500 samples. That's what the documentation says. So I went for 1,000 samples and it took 17 hours. So we can only imagine what that might take. So I'm going to come back to this kind of rendering issue in like a little mini video. And like I said, it'll probably take me a couple of days. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and save this rendering because it did take so awful long. And like all good computer users, I'm going to throw it on my desktop without thinking. That was a joke. It's my version of a joke. So, and I did promise that I would show you one other thing in this video, and that is the idea of scaling a texture. And so we can certainly do that. I remember that I was very bothered by the fact that the wood flooring was not sort of the perfect proportion. In other words, these slats were about twice as thick as they needed to be. So first of all, I'm going to get myself over here. I'm going to select the floor, which I can't, oh, I can do. I thought I had locked the room, but I guess I haven't. Okay, so here, what we do is it'll come up with the material in this side tab. And you may remember that we set up just kind of a generic texture. So there are a couple things that are wrong with this texture, and we can see it specifically in the rendering. One is that the texture just flat out, like the wood floor slats are too big. And if I bring up the rendering, the other thing that's wrong with this texture is that it's just ever so slightly kind of under resolution. You can see how here it gets kind of pixelated and blown out, but when it's scaled to be smaller, it kind of holds up a lot better. That's because all of these textures that you download have a pixel size. So you do need to kind of think about that when you select images for textures. It's kind of like you might have a Goldilocks moment. In other words, if your texture is gigantic and has a huge pixel size, it's going to cause your render times to increase. But it will also look really gorgeous. So, maybe then of course you can have one that's too small or not enough pixels. And then you get stuff like that, which is, that like hurts just to look at it. So of course we can kind of scale the texture, and that will change the relationship of the pixels to the render scale. We could also go out and find a higher resolution texture. I'm not going to do that right now. I'm going to scale it. So I did want to just kind of show you a little bit about textures and resolution. I guess if you're looking for sort of a rule or a general rule of thumb, I would probably not use a texture that has a file size of more than 20 megabytes. 10 would be even safer. That's plenty of resolution. That's a lot of resolution for a texture. But it doesn't, if you're making, a 1920 by 1080 rendering, it doesn't benefit you to have a texture that's 12,000 pixels by 10,000 pixels. Usually I tend to keep textures in terms of pixel size in the under 2,000 pixels range. So we're gonna scale this thing down. So we're gonna click here. And that was slightly suspenseful. It took a second to come up there. So for some reason, when this thing pops up, it's like super tiny. You can just kind of maybe, get it to be a little bit larger. So what we're going to do here, it's not super direct. Instead of telling it to scale, we're actually going to set a repeat value. And so if we set a repeat value, let me think here, of like 0.5. Okay, that's the wrong direction. So we want to make it like twice as compressed. So we would repeat it twice. And you just have to kind of, experiment with this. So I'm going to go even a little bit thinner. And by doing that, I'm actually, allowing it to be higher resolution because it is repeating now. So, oh my God, I feel so much better. That's so much less annoying. I guess, thinking forward, I'm going to definitely babble a little bit more about rendering in this bonus video. We can close this now. But one thing I also wanted to kind of throw at you is that if you're thinking about making a rendering, it's not a terrible idea to do something like a draft rendering. So the reason I say that is because remember how this thing looks right now, and it's got a metal material on it. And we sort of got into this situation where we were like, well, looks pretty unpleasant, but look, we're going to go with it and just see what happens. So, and then you noticed in the render, it looked completely different. So, so what you can do here is you can go to, the render settings here, or you can go up to the render menu and do render properties. And I'm going to put this into the less amazing and time-consuming renderer, the legacy Rhino renderer. And instead of final quality, I'm just going to put it in draft quality. And I guess what draft quality allows you to do is it allows you to make a rendering in a way that doesn't take very long at all. So if you're kind of tweaking out your lights, or you're sort of refining, the amount of light that's going on something, or where something goes, I can absolutely guarantee you that this rendering will be done in less than 2 minutes. less than 3 minutes. I'll see you in a minute. You can put me to the test on that. Okay, I confess I lied. It took about stupid hot 6 minutes.
Get that.
So it took 6 minutes, and it is, it's not that bad. It doesn't look much worse than a final rendering one. We're going to go ahead and put this one also on the desktop and save it. And I'm going to do, I guess, one head-to-head comparison today that is in the Legacy Rhino rendering mode. What does the final look like versus the draft? And you may remember that I said that the light was off in this rendering. And now that I'm looking at it again, I actually don't think that's the case. It looks to me like the light is actually on, and that's what this sort of horizon is coming from. So when I get into doing the other type of rendering that takes forever, I'm definitely going to be just, taking a close look at that. So I think in order to really, figure out the difference of these two methods, we're going to need to put them side by side. And let's see. So you can see the file name here. So it's pretty difficult to distinguish. I haven't changed anything about the lighting or any of the parameters really, except for the rendering mode. I guess we could say that it looks like the lighting is a little bit less developed here in this highlight, and also the shadow looks a little bit less complicated. I think you're really going to see the difference when we zoom in on this. And so if we zoom in here versus here, you can see the quality difference, I think, pretty strongly now. So let me get this a little larger too. So you can see that the draft one has kind of a stippled effect. And that's because it has not sort of like fully gotten to sort of figure out what all these pixels are doing. So it's just guessing, basically, and that's how it speeds up the rendering process. So it's not a big difference, though. I mean, I would say good quality probably would be fine. And like I said, here we've got a 6-minute render. So this is certainly short enough for you to turn lights on and off and see what things really look like in the render. Because I think the lesson that we can definitely draw from all of this is that with materials, you cannot really rely on the preview in Rhino. So if we just go back to Rhino here, and we just look at this one thing, I mean, you can see that there's a vague approximation of what it looks like. But we don't really get to see what it looks like until we do that final render. So I'm going to play around a little bit more with the settings on the renderer, and I'm going to play around with these sort of full quality, you must give up Netflix for 2 days renderer. But in the meantime, don't forget that if you're looking for kind of a quick way to get renderings that look decent and that you can experiment with, I would definitely try the Legacy Rhino renderer, which is incidentally what we're looking at right now. So I will see you all again soon, and hopefully with some different renders. Okay, thanks. Bye.